Welcome to the Labyrinth. I'm your host, Pratham Padav. If you would like to support my podcast, buy my t-shirt. Link is in the description. My guest today is Jayant Bhandari. He is an investor and entrepreneur, particularly in the natural resource sector. He is also a contributing editor of the Liberty magazine, and he's also written articles on political, economic, and cultural issues for the Mises Institute, KC Research, Mining Journal, etc. He runs a yearly philosophy seminar in Vancouver called Capitalism and Morality. Okay, welcome to the Labyrinth, Jayant. So I want to start by asking, prior to moving to Canada, how was your life here in India?
Well, Pratham, I was a very successful executive in India before I left the country. I started Indian operations of two European companies. One of them became the biggest supplier of equipment in its market in the country. So I had two very good successes in India. And that's when I realized that the reason for my successes were different from my competencies or the quality of my equipment. I was operating in an extraordinarily corrupt environment where the only thing that mattered was bribes. It was universal, in which the guy from the very top to the guy to the very bottom was asking for bribes. But that's what I was doing in India. I had a very successful career. I left my job and I moved to Canada at one point of time.
What is it about Indian culture that you think does not allow us to progress the way the West or the way East Asia has progressed?
Pratham, one biggest problem with Indians is that Indians do not have moral consciousness. Indians do not have a concept of right and wrong. Now, they can be very religious, but they are religious in a very fatalistic sense, in a very materialistic sense. They are afraid of things which make them religious. But Indian religious environment does not lead to a spiritual awakening. It does not lead to a moral consciousness. India is a desert of moral consciousness. There's virtually no moral consciousness in the country. Now, people know and speak the right things. So, if you ask people, is corruption bad? Is theft bad? They will all say the right things, but that's not what their behavior shows. You can meet your relatives or someone on the street, and that person will tell you how bad corruption is and what he would do if he became the prime minister of the country. And right in front of you, 5 minutes later, this person goes around giving bribes for unearned benefits. Now, he does not even necessarily give bribe for what belongs to him, but he gives bribes to expropriate wealth of other people or improve his chances of getting something something that does not belong to him. So again, Indians simply do not have moral consciousness. Indians talk big about what is right and wrong, but at the end of the day, there is no application of moral consciousness in the country.
Isn't it very ironic that the land, this country that is a desert of moral consciousness, it's a land of hypocrisy, because that's something that we see everywhere, also produces so many gurus and godmen?
There's nothing strange about it, Pratham. We might want to feel very nationalistic and great about all the great philosophers India has created. Indeed, India has created some great men. But remember, 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6 people on the planet is an Indian. So if you have as many as 1 out of 5 philosophers as Indians, then it's something to feel good about, but we don't even have 1 out of 5 great philosophers coming from India. If it's 1 out of 100, I would be surprised. If it's actually one out of 200, I would be very surprised as well. So no, we don't create all that many philosophers, but having said that, India has created some great men, but every country has created its great men. I have to say that in the current nationalistic environment where Indians think that they are the cradle of humanity, they are completely wrong. India isn't a cradle of humanity. While India has given some great philosophers, most of them got recognized once they had left India and had started living in the Western society.
How do you think we can reform Indian culture?
Pratham, there is no easy way to reform the Indian culture. This is not a process which takes a few generations or a few centuries. This can easily take a millennia. Changing society is a very long process. Creating moral consciousness in the society is a very, very long process because everything is linked together. You can't just create moral consciousness in isolation. It's a holistic process. It's an organic process. It's a process that takes a very, very long time. If you look at the European history, it took them many centuries, probably I would say 3 millennia before they started getting to where they are today. And even then, everything is fragile. So creating a moral consciousness is an extremely hard job. What we can certainly do is to take the first step forward. Now, what would that first step be? My view is that we should be attracting the very best people to run the institutions of the country. Because of democracy, we bring in the very worst people to run our institutions. And really, our institutions are populated by people who are at the bottom of the barrel people. They are horrendously corrupt. They are horrendously self-centered and materialistic and truly the worst people on the planet. Now, how can we bring the best people to run the government? Look at how United Arab Emirates run. Look at how Singapore or Hong Kong runs. Look at how Taiwan, South Korea, and even Japan runs. What they do is that often they bring in the very best people from around the world to run their institutions. We should do the same thing. We should get rid of all these stupid, thoroughly stupid, low IQ politicians, extremely sadistic bureaucrats that India has, and replace them with some of the most competent people in the world. Bring them from America, bring them from the UK, put them in place there. The person who runs your institutions does not have to be an Indian. It does not matter to me, Pratham, who runs my institutions as long as the institutions do the job they are supposed to do. So I think that would be the first step. Bring in the very best people from around the world to run our institutions. But that is only going to be possible once we get rid of democracy. Democracy does not allow a thought process that would lead to bringing the very best people from the world to run our institutions. And actually what we have done over the last 50 to 70 years is that we have inverted everything. Now we have a democratic system in which the masses who are tribal, who are uneducated, who have no moral consciousness, who are desperate, vote on the basis of their extraordinarily limited self-centered thinking, survivalist thinking. And then on top of that, we have implemented all kinds of affirmative action policies, what we call reservation in India, which means that the quality of people in the institutions is far worse than it would have been had we just kept ourselves democratic plus meritocratic for the government system. Because today we have virtually no meritocracy in the government jobs, the institutions. People, if you go to a government office, and I think whenever people praise India, Indians praise India, they should at least attempt to go to a government office and try to feel in, try to understand with their feelings what a government office looks like and what it feels like. And they realize that people working in the government are not just corrupt, they are thoroughly stupid and thoroughly sadistic and totally unskilled and totally incompetent. And that is the kind of institutions we have today.
Speaking of democracy, I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Madhusudan Raj in my previous episode. In the past couple of elections, when I used to vote in the election, I was voting for the lesser of two evils. But now I'm thinking of not voting at all and just boycotting the idea of elections and democracy. What do you think we Indians should do? Should we vote or not vote?
Well, I would be happy to vote for the lesser of the two evils if I knew who the lesser of the two evils is. But that is virtually impossible, Pratham. The problem is that you are trying to differentiate between turd of dog A from turd of dog B. Now, which one is more delicious? I don't know. I have no palate to differentiate between two turds. And that's the problem we exist in today. Now, when I look at what's happening in America, when there is a competition between Trump and Biden, and if I had to vote, I would very happily go and vote for Trump because the difference is so much, in my opinion. From my eyes, Trump is clearly a much, much, much better candidate than Biden is. But when I look at India, I see no difference between politicians. They are virtually the same. And yes, at a superficial level, one politician might look better than the other, but then I'm not close to them. I'm not spending my day-to-day time with them. I don't have enough information about all of them to able to judge which one is better than the other. So if I were in India, I would very likely not vote because my vote really makes no difference in that country.
Would India be better off if we abandoned socialism and adopted libertarianism?
Well, it's a complete myth, Pratham, that India has socialism. India does not have socialism at all. India is a feral country. It's a wild jungle. Socialism would be a huge positive move for India. And remember, in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, India was being helped by USSR, which was a socialist communist country. USSR's GDP per capita was many, many times that of India. If I recall it correct, it was at least 10, 20 times more than Indian GDP per capita was. So socialist countries did very well compared to India, and socialist countries continue to do much better than India. Compare India with, let's say, Cuba. Cuba is a much richer country than India is. Look at Ecuador. Ecuador is a much better, much richer country than India is. In fact, most of Latin America is leftist, it's socialist, but they are much better, much nicer than India is. So socialism is a horrible concept, Pratham, don't get me wrong there. But Indian system is far worse than socialism. Socialism requires at least the first order of moral values right. India hasn't got even the first order of moral values right. India is just a jungle. It's a feral place where there is no right and wrong. Socialists at least start thinking what is right and wrong, and they get it wrong. But India hasn't even started that process. So we are far worse off than a socialist country compared to what we would have been were we a socialist country.
Okay. Moving to a completely different topic. For a very long time, liberals in the West have said that diversity is good and society will benefit from it. But at the same time, globalization and diversity has destroyed local cultures and smaller communities. The most diverse cities also have the highest crime rates. But look at you, as a brown man in Canada, you seem to have benefited from globalization and diversity. Overall, should we be grateful for diversity or should we criticize it?
Well, I have been a massive beneficiary of diversity and globalization. I would have been stuck in a small town in India earning virtually nothing compared to what I do now. My life is wonderful. So, and my life was wonderful even when I was in India. I was one of the better paid, better placed executives. I was the CEO of two European companies in India in my early 20s. So that was, my life has been great. Globalization and diversity has given me a lot. But what it has given me does not mean it has given to the average person. My view is that India is in many ways far worse today than it was 30 years back, before the technology kicked in, before progress kicked in. And the reason is, Pratham, that of course it seems that your life is much better than what it would have been had we not gone through this technological revolution. But go outside wherever you live, drive out 10 kilometers from where you live, and you realize that the pollution is far worse than it was 30 years back. People are desperate for food and jobs. People have mobile phones, but what they watch on mobile phones is pornography and exchange superstitions. So they are no better educated than they would have been without that technology. So if you look at globalization, I don't think 90% of Indians have benefited in any way from this globalization and technical revolution, and even the so-called economic progress. What they have and remaining might have benefited from it, but that does not tell you the situation of the average guy. Now, diversity has been suicidal for the Western society, because as long as Americans, Canadians, Australians, and New Zealand people were bringing in people from Europe or East Asia being Japan, Korea, and China, they were bringing the very best of Europe and East Asia to the US and Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, that situation has changed over the last 40 to 50 years, because they have removed this requirement of immigrant to be European. Now they bring in people from all over the world. And the problem is that when they bring in people from the third world countries, they mostly bring in people who have no moral consciousness. And it's the same problem again, Pratham. If you open the gates for people from Africa or the Indian subcontinent or even Latin America, you enable a much larger proportion of people lacking moral consciousness to move into your country. And that has been the problem with, let's say, America or Canada today. Now, America and Canada are great melting pots, but they are great melting pots if you have moral consciousness, if you believe in the values of Western civilization. But you clearly see that over the last 40 to 60 years, the kind of people that have moved to the US and Canada, Australia, and New Zealand are the kind of people who are materialistic, who do not have moral consciousness. And that has had a degrading effect on the culture of these countries.
What is your opinion on this whole woke culture and cancel culture promoted and propagated by liberal progressives, because you have said in the past few minutes that people from third world countries, Africa, South Asia, don't have moral consciousness. And you can say that. But if a white person said the same thing that you were saying, liberals would label him as a racist or a white nationalist, even though he's objectively right.
Well, absolutely, and and that is how I want to contribute to where I live today. I want to use the fact that I can get away with a few things more than a white person does. Now, that should never have been the case. We should be able to speak freely. We should be able to speak our mind, and people should have the opportunity to argue and debate with me, or say that I'm wrong. But today, the cancel culture has become very dominant in the Western society. The woke culture has become very dominant. Now, before I respond to you fully, let me explain the word liberal. Liberal word is extremely confusing. Liberal word in the United Kingdom relates to freedom, individuality, and self-responsibility. It relates to a concept of honor and integrity, whereas liberal in the United States and Canada means something completely different. It means no self-responsibility. It means keeping your eye on the wallet of other person and trying to steal as much as possible from the other person's pocket. These are the people who whine, who have no concept of self-responsibility and honor, and they expect benefits from other people in the society. These are dependent people. Now, what is woke culture and what is this cancel culture? Surprisingly, it is very similar to the culture of the third world countries. The woke people actually love the third world. They love the chaos, the smell of feces, the noise of third world countries, because they are feral people. And that is why woke people love the third world people. Now, these woke so-called liberal leftists, the so-called progressives, are truly the losers of the Western society. And they are, in how their mind works, no different from how the minds of people in the third world work. So these are culturally third world people, the woke people and the cancel culture people.
The West has been doing quite well for over a century now as a result of reason and rational thinking. But in the past 1 or 2 decades, mostly because of left liberals and progressives, the West seems to be slowly deteriorating. Lower birth rates, increasing crime, political correctness. They're even confused on how to define a man and a woman. Are we witnessing the final days of the West?
Yeah, I mean, let me just correct one thing. I don't think the Western society did well in the last 100 years. I think the Western society saw its prime, its peak several hundred years back. Now, that does not have to reflect economically right away. The West was culturally a far superior place, probably 150 years back than it is today. Yes, the Western society has already peaked. The Western society is rapidly getting worse. I think the best country on the planet, America, a country that I love and still spend a lot of my time in, is going down the fastest. And the biggest problem is the so-called diversity, the one that you mentioned earlier. Diversity has meant that they have accepted all kinds of people from around the world who refuse to assimilate in the society, who refuse to be respectful to the Western civilization, and who refuse to understand, who have no concept of what Western philosophy is all about. So America now has a massive number of people who are like those. And in fact, if you look at the statistics, the number of people who are first or second generation immigrants in Canada and Australia, you get to get a glimpse of what the future would be like. I think about 26% of Australians and Canadians are first generation immigrants, which means that if you that as many as half of their populations could be first or second generation immigrants. Now that's far too many people from outside their own society, outside their own civilization. If you bring in so many people, you will dilute your civilization away. I can truly understand if you bring in 0.1% of your population as from outside your own society, but making it 25 to 50% is truly horrendous and suicidal for your society. And that's what the West has done. There are many other reasons. This is only one of the reasons. I think comforts and luxury and leisure time can be bad, negative for the culture of the society, because it can make you dull. It can make you less aware of the need to keep fighting for civilization. And I think that has also happened in the Western society. They don't have this impulse to necessarily fight for what is right, in the sense that they will not necessarily step out as they probably did 50 years back. Now, again, I must say that there's a massive, massive difference between a country like India and the country like Canada. If there is any trouble on the street in Canada, many people will step out to help you out. It's a great, great society, but compared to what it used to be and looking at the direction these countries in the West have taken, I'm fairly convinced that the best days of the West are over, and it's degrading rather rapidly.
I know that India lacks with regards to moral consciousness and a productive culture, but let's put that aside for a while. Let's say that was not a problem at all. Once we have fixed this moral and cultural issues, do you think India can benefit from libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism?
What you're saying is that cut the roots of the tree out, and would the tree be beneficial if we gave it good fertilizer and good air? Unfortunately, it won't. If you don't have the fundamentals right, if you don't have the roots right, nothing will, the tree can't stand on it, so it can't stand straight anymore. It will just fall apart. Without moral consciousness, believe me, there's no progress. You can have some short-term progress, you can have some short-term improvement in your life, but it will not be sustainable. And you can see that in terms of what has happened in the last 30 years, and disagree with me, Pratham, if you want to, but the health of Indians have deteriorated rapidly over the last 30 years. Now a 40-year-old person cannot walk straight because he eats too much sugar, he eats too much bad food, he uses his time for too much leisure. He is too stressed because he's trying to make more and more money. And the end result is that progress, in my view, hasn't really done a lot of good to the emotional and psychological health to a lot of people. Look at women. Women have got a lot of freedom in the country over the last 30 years. But I'm afraid of sitting next to a woman on the plane. I mean, she could end up charging me for rape in a crowded plane. And that's indeed possible in India today. So everything gets used for depraved, degenerate purposes if the roots are not right, if the principles are not there. So without moral consciousness, nothing is possible. Now, what is libertarianism? What is capitalism? Capitalism and libertarianism are very deep moral concepts. These are not economic concepts. And remember, even the word economic has changed its meaning. When Adam Smith wrote his book, he wrote about, what was the name of the book? The Moral Sentiments of the Society or something. I can't remember, but the book was about moral values. Economics is about moral values. Libertarianism is about moral values. Capitalism is about moral values. So how can you detach moral values from something that is actually a moral concept? You can enforce a moral structure, but at least that moral structure must be enforced by moral people. So and that's what I said initially, you have to bring in the very best people from around the world who are morally conscious, who are skilled, who are competent, who know the difference between right and wrong. And if they create a structure, the society can indeed improve. But if you think you can remove moral values and still have a progressing society, you are deluded.
I think the only solution that I can think of after hearing everything you're saying is that we have to sort of overthrow Indian democracy. If we overthrow democracy, what are the practical alternatives?
So Pratham, today it is believed that Indians wanted to fight for the so-called freedom. Remember, India never got its freedom. It never got its independence. The rulers changed from the British to brain-dead, sadistic junkies. That's what we have today. So, and does it really matter to me whether a white guy rapes me or a brown guy, Babu, rapes me? If I get raped, I get raped anyway. I'm just going to hope that the rapist is less ruthless with me. And clearly, the British were less ruthless. If at all, you can compare the ruthlessness between the British and the current regimes of India. I mean, go to a police station. People get openly beaten up by the police today, and there is nothing that happens. The courts don't take any action against the policeman, and the policeman gets away with absolutely everything. That was not the case when the British were ruling the country. Now, before 1947, we now, because we are told selective history, we are taught a small part of the history. We are told that Indians were fighting for independence. No, Indians were not fighting for independence. A minority of people who had got educated in the United Kingdom returned back to India to start this so-called independence movement. Most of the society had no clue about this independence movement and had no interest in independence movement. A lot of leaders like Rabindranath Tagore were not in favor of independence movement, from what I understand. They wanted the British to stay on. In fact, Ram Mohan Roy was a full participant in using the British to change the Indian culture, to improve it, to end the Sati Pratha, to end the bad, horrible aspects of Hinduism and Islam. So a lot of Indian leaders were with the British. They wanted the British to continue, and they did not like this independence movement. They knew what would happen if India became so-called independent. Now, Pratham, have you seen a statue of Raja Ram Mohan Roy anywhere in the country?
I don't think so, no.
There isn't any. There isn't any. We don't recognize people who change our society. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was the key figure that ended the Sati Pratha. Okay. Now, should the feminist organization, should India not recognize him for what he did for India? We don't. Now, where is the statue of Raja Ram Mohan Roy? In Bristol, in the United Kingdom. Because we don't see greatness of human beings, so we don't recognize them for their greatness. So So on one hand, there were a lot of leaders who were against the so-called independence movement. They knew what would come to India if India gained so-called independence, but also a very large population of Indians knew what would happen once the British had left. There was a massive exodus from India in the 40s and 50s. They went to live in the UK. Now, these people, and you can include me among those people, we got rid of white people, and then I ended up living in a white country to be ruled by white people, theoretically. So a lot of people recognized that Indians would fail to run our institutions, Indians would destroy everything. And in the 40s and 50s, they left India and settled down in the UK. And they are doing extremely well because this was the cream of Indians that left India to live in the West.
Yeah. Would India be better off if our country got decentralized or disintegrated?
India is going to get decentralized. It will disintegrate. The funny thing is that we believe in becoming global power, and we believe in how important India is to the world. India is unimportant to the world. No one cares a damn about the country. People here give lip service to India, but apart from that, they don't really care about India. India is falling apart. Go outside your house. India is visually falling apart because the caliber of Indian leaders is so low, and in fact negative, because they are truly brain dead and they are truly junkies and they're truly sadistic, that India is falling right in front of your eyes. You just have to go out, walk around a bit and try to experience how the society is functioning. There's nothing keeping that country together. Now, the problem with low IQ people, the problem with these sadistic people is that they can't manage even a small system, but they want to make a system larger and larger because it gives them ego satisfaction to have a bigger control over the society. But they are mentally incapable of running big institutions. And it's very simple for anyone who has tried to manage two Indians. If you have a small manufacturing operation with 5 people, try managing them. It's an extraordinarily hard job because no one does his job properly unless you supervise him nonstop. So you can't really have bigger institutions, bigger operations in a centralized country. And India has this huge instinct to centralize the country. India will fall apart. India will disintegrate with time. But would it be beneficial to the country? Again, you are trying to compare turd of dog A with turd of dog B. Remember, India was never a country until the time the British came. India is a British product. Yeah. Now, India is a British product, and India will, under the management of Indians, become tribal. It's a feral people. They will disintegrate automatically. I'm not absolutely sure if it will be better or worse for what will be the situation then. But whatever happens, lives of Indians will be far worse going forward than it is today. Lives of Indians have got worse and worse with time. So remember that whether we have centralization or decentralization, India is not improving unless we get better leaders to run the country.
Yeah, your criticism of Indians and India as a whole was quite accurate, and I'm sure for a lot of Indians it will be very shocking. Because when I leave my house and go out and talk to people, or when I look at the family WhatsApp groups, they're so hopeful. They say things like, under Narendra Modi, India will become a Vishwa Guru. And they use these big words like Akhanda Bharat and all that nationalistic, jingoistic words. Why do you think there is such a huge contradiction between reality and the imagination of Indians?
And that is actually a huge problem with Indians. A lot of people contradict me based on what they think India would be in the future. Now, you can't compare apples with elephant. Forget about comparing apples with oranges. They try to compare apples with elephants. I have been in investment conferences where people tell me that India will be growing at the rate of 15% per year for the next 20 years, and it will become better than the US. And hence, India is better than the US. Now, that's so mind-bogglingly stupid. But Indian logic has its own structure, which is completely irrational, and that stays with the so-called educated people. Pratham, one thing I tell you, very interesting. I have been living in the West for the last 30 years. Earlier I criticized the Western society about the woke people and I can sit down with people and criticize America for its certain policies. Why should it be interfering, let's say, in the Middle East? And I can say that, hey, American troops killed so many people for no good reason. I can't remember a single occasion when an American told me that why I was anti-American, why I did not like America. They don't conclude from my saying anything bad, negative about America as a reflection of my anti-American attitude. In India, virtually every time I say anything that does not look good about India, I'm immediately blamed for being an anti-national. Now that means that Indians are so emotional about everything. Just look at facts, stick to facts, and discuss facts rather than become emotional about it. In fact, I speak up not because I am anti-Indian or I hate India. I want India to improve. I want India to do well. But that is only possible if I can point out the errors of the ways of Indian society. If we don't point those out, nothing is going to change. But Indians will not listen to this. And the problem is that they have no moral consciousness. They live on the policy of expediency, materialism, and self-centeredness. Ask all these nationalistic people and you will, if you explore them enough, you will realize that they are extremely self-centered and materialistic. Ask them whether we should be fighting a war with Pakistan, and they will say, yes, we should be fighting a war with Pakistan. Would you go to fight a war with Pakistan? And you will really understand that there's a difference between what they say and what they do.
Okay. Going on a completely different but an important tangent, what is your opinion on the ongoing COVID authoritarianism?
God, I mean, this has been truly, truly idiotic. I was in India in November 2016 when Narendra Modi declared demonetization, and I was in India when he closed everything down in early 2020. They were decisions which I thought even primary school students should not have taken. They were so childish, so naive, something that did nothing good to the country. Just talking about demonetization, there is more cash in India today than there ever was. There is more corruption in India. There's more bribe taking and exchange of cash today than there ever was in the country. And I have been involved in something in India recently. And I tell you, when I left India, India was not that corrupt as it is today. I mean, corrupt bribes get exchanged openly in the country today. Now, coming to COVID, I mean, this has been absolutely crazy. And the middle-class Indians who are supposed to be the moral spine of the society have no spine. They have provided no intellectual nutrition to the society. I mean, these idiots were banging pots and pans from their apartment buildings, thinking that banging those pots and pans would get rid of COVID. They had no understanding, absolutely no understanding about what would happen to 99% of Indians. Yes, these middle-class Indians who live in nice gated communities, who have servants and maids, could work from home. They were still probably getting their salaries because they work for public sector companies or big companies that continue to pay salaries. But what was happening to those maids and servants, people living in villages, in agricultural areas? 99% of people, they were walking literally thousands of kilometers back home because Narendra Modi, in his supreme intelligence, put a stop to all flights and trains and all buses. And these people were walking in summer weather with their children and with their luggage, hundreds and thousands of kilometers. I mean, this was a humanitarian disaster which had no intelligence behind it. I would say, I mean, really, Narendra Modi should face a complaint of genocide because of the grotesque decisions that he took. The way the Indian police beat up people who were trying to go to the hospital or trying to come out of their suffocating shanty rooms. This was grotesque. Now, lockdown did happen elsewhere as well, but it was nowhere as grotesque as was in India. And for a poor country, India was truly a special country because a lot of other poor countries decided, hey, we are too poor to copy the Chinese way or the American way. We should just let the society be open and face the consequences. And they did far better than countries like India. We destroyed the economy. We played with lives of literally hundreds of millions of people.
I am going to say something a little cruel. These people who were, these poor migrants who were walking hundreds of miles and dying on their way, I get angry at them as well because they're partially responsible for that. Because right after this migrant crisis, there was an election in Bihar, a state that contributes a lot of migrant laborers, and they made BJP's coalition win again. So it's very ironic that these poor people vote for their own misery.
Well, Pratham, that comes back to lack of moral consciousness. Sorry, absence of moral consciousness. They don't connect dots properly. And because they don't have moral consciousness, they cannot differentiate between right and wrong. You look at a normal Indian, if he gets beaten up by someone senior, what does he do? He goes and beats someone junior. He goes and beats up a junior. Okay, he does not fight back against his senior, and you see that across the country. I mean, I went to one of the best engineering colleges in India, and I was so flabbergasted with what I saw. There would be what we call ragging when you trouble the newcomers into this in the university, and a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of newcomers didn't like it, but a year later, they were doing exactly the same thing. And when I told them that, listen, this is just so sadistic, why would you do that? The response was, we were harmed or we were beaten up, so we are now going to beat up. And I said, yeah, that's perfectly fine. But go and beat up people who beat you up rather than go and beat up people who have nothing to do with you. But Indians, even the so-called intelligent people, do not have moral consciousness, and hence they cannot take right decisions. Indians they think they are very street smart. They are among the most gullible people I have known because they don't have moral consciousness. They don't stand mentally on a firm ground. So they can't understand right and wrong. They get fooled very easily. You talk nice words with an Indian and he is all over you very quickly without realizing that the person who is speaking all those nice words is merely trying to exploit him or fool him. Yes, I completely agree with you that these poor fools went to vote for exactly the same people who had destroyed their lives. But again, Pratham, the backbone of society is the middle class. And Indian middle class is very unique in the world, that it does not have moral consciousness. I have been to about 100 countries, and most countries many times. And everywhere I have seen that as a country progresses and becomes better, as the middle class grows, moral consciousness grows. In India, the exact opposite is happening. People are becoming simply more materialistic and depraved.
What is your opinion on vaccine mandates, both here in India and in Canada?
Well, I think I'm not an anti-vaxxer. If people want to get the vaccine, go and take it, keep it to yourself. What kind of underwear I'm wearing, I'm not going to show you. Okay, whether I'm vaccinated or not, I don't want to talk about it. I think it's a private matter. If you take it, that's perfectly fine. If you think it's good taking a vaccine, evaluate it, take it. But declaring it on social media that I'm proud to say that I have taken the third booster now is idiotic. Don't talk about it. And there is absolutely no reason for any government to mandate vaccine on people. These vaccine passports are a way towards tyranny. They are disastrous for humanity. Which does not mean, again, I have nothing against the vaccine. If the vaccine are good, take it. If you think they are good, take it. Don't impose it on other people. The vaccine mandate should go, and they will go. It won't be too long before they go.
What do you think will be the outcome of the Canadian truckers' revolt? And I use the word revolt because I don't think this is a protest. This is far more than that.
Well, and I'm happy you asked that question, because when I said that vaccine mandates will go, and they will go over the next few weeks, and thanks to Canadian truckers. Canadian truckers have brought in a revolution in terms of protests against the vaccine mandates. You have to hold them in extremely high regard for what they have done. And exactly, Pratham, just responding a bit more to your earlier question on the subject, this is what I would have expected from poor people of India. This is what I would have expected from the middle class of Indians. I would have expected them during demonetization and during imposition of lockdown in March 2020, that, hey, we are not going to listen to this stupidity, and you can't beat people up to pulp. The police can't beat people up to pulp just because they dared to go to the hospital. Now, Canadian truckers have brought in a revolution. They have brought in a change of thinking. They have brought in a way for those people who were against this increasing tyranny to come together and fight back against tyranny. And remember, the Western civilization is a civilization, and I have to say, it's the only civilization I know of. India is not a civilization. Third world countries are not civilizations. Western societies are the only civilizations I know of, and they are civilizations because of people like these Canadian truckers. They fight for what is right. They fight for what is honorable. They stand up against what is wrong. So yes, Canadian truckers have done a fabulous job. And if at all I feel any pride in being a Canadian, this is it.
I'm going to follow that up with a very loaded and a very biased question. Do you think Justin Trudeau is a spineless coward?
Justin Trudeau is a third worlder, woke liberal. He has no mind of his own. And he got into power mostly because of dynastic reason and because of his looks. A lot of women like his looks. And that perplexes me. That tells you so much about what democracy is all about. These educated women voted for him because of his looks. They could have easily gone to a strip club. They could have paid $5, $10, $15 for a strip club and could have had a look at a much nicer looking guy. It's completely idiotic. I mean, the guy was was a substitute teacher. He was not even a proper teacher, and he was teaching snowboarding and skiing. I mean, the guy has had no experience of running institutions, and he ended up becoming the prime minister. And that is the degradation that to institutions that democracy brings in. Democracy is termite. It eats away everything very quickly, all institutions very quickly.
Okay. I know that two of the topics that you speak a lot on is investment and liberty. And now we see a lot of people investing in cryptocurrencies, which they think will usher in a new age of economic liberty. What is your opinion on these cryptocurrencies?
Well, no liberty will come without the roots of moral consciousness. You can run away, and you can run away from tyrannical environment by tinkering with the superficial aspects, but that can benefit only people like you and me. It cannot benefit the larger population. And without the larger population being morally awakened, we will die out as well. So what we need is a healthy, morally conscious society for people with liberty to survive. Now, cryptos or something like that could give an escape route to people who are liberty oriented. But that's not going to be good for that's not going to release the society from tyranny. Now, is our cryptos the right thing to do? Hey, I am not invested in any cryptos. I think they are ones and zeros without any backing in the cloud. And for me, that gives them a value of zero. So I don't use cryptos. I don't see value in cryptos. And I don't think they offer you a true escape from monetary tyranny. The problem is that there are many things. The transaction costs are huge. At the end of the day, cryptos are all valued in terms of fiat currency. What if what if the cryptos are banned? What if you don't have internet connection? I don't see any value in cryptos myself. I think in very short, they are worth zero.
Okay. All right. I live in Mangalore in coastal Karnataka, and I think you know what is happening in this region lately. A few of the government colleges are refusing to allow Muslim girls to enter the premises while wearing the hijab, and we are seeing an increase in communal tensions and rowdyism from both sides. Saffron shawl wearing boys are causing chaos and even violence in few instances. And it's not like the other side is any better. What do you make of this? Do you think we'll ever have peace between these two chaotic religions?
No, they will not have peace ever. And the problem is not the two religions. The dichotomy is not Islam versus Hinduism. The dichotomy is that the fact is that Indians just are not peaceful people. They always whine, they blame other people for all their problems, and they always hate the other person. So what happens if you separate Hindus from Muslims? Muslims will then fight, there will be fights between Shias and Sunnis, and then different sects of Shias among themselves, as you can see in Bangladesh and Pakistan. So the fights will continue. And if India ever became a Hindu-only nation, what will happen? Hindus will start fighting among themselves because they will, Shaivya will think they are better than Vaishnav, and all kinds of idiocies will re-emerge. So the problem is not Islam versus Hinduism. The problem is that we are not rational, morally rooted people. We are people who are tribal, basically tribal, and we are always fighting with other tribes. We are always looking for which other tribe to fight with. And then within our tribe, we fight for tribal supremacy, who wants to become the leader of the tribe. So the fights are all over, and that's where that's what you see all over the country. You look at any small groups in India, any small office, see how the culture works. There's horrendous office politics between people. They hate each other. Look at how families work. Families are very dysfunctional. People hate each other in families. So this Muslim Hindu issue is not the real issue. The real issue is that Indians are like that, and how do you change fundamentally their character?
I don't mean to get too personal, but because you brought up family matters, I saw on your Facebook that you had posted a while back. I believe one of your family members is harassing your father by bribing a government officer and trying to take away his land. What exactly is happening there?
It's absolutely crazy, Pratham. What happened was that one of my family members engaged a lawyer who put armed goons inside my dad's house and who was able to control the whole police system, which meant that no one would take phone call of my dad, no police system, no seniors helpline would take the call of my dad's phone call. And the police was registering police cases without any investigation, not that investigations necessarily happen in the country. And the problem is that there's no social dynamics which come to people like those criminally minded people and say, hey, this is wrong, stop it. What I have seen is that people in the society either stay out, or when they want to engage, they want to look good rather than do the right thing. They don't want to tell the person who was harming my dad that, hey, you're doing something wrong, step back, and we are going to boycott you socially if you continue to do these things. But we don't have that social force because, again, we don't have the moral consciousness in the society. And again, over the last 3 months, the kind of corruption, the depravities and degenerate behavior I have seen in society is just off the charts. I now tell people that I have been completely wrong about India. India is 100 times, 1,000 times worse than I thought it was. India is just a completely depraved and degenerate society.
Is there any hope for India?
Well, there's hope for isolated people. As you said, that people should always be looking for a way out of trouble. And people who are looking at cryptos to get out of monetary tyranny, I can understand them, except that I don't like cryptos myself, but I can understand them. There are ways to live that you can escape your local tyranny, and I can fully understand those people. Is there a way out for Indians? Yes, I think there's a way out for Indians, but only isolated Indians, which is to leave the country. Look at China. China is a wonderful country. China is like a first world country when I go to China from India. It's a lovely place. Go to Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea. They are lovely places. Go to Western countries. Compared to India, the Western countries are 1,000 times, 10,000 times better. But is there a hope for India? No, there is no hope for India, and I don't invest in India. I keep my involvement in India to the minimal.
Okay. All the countries that you mentioned, I agree they're great, like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, etc. But why do you say that China is a great country? It's because if you look at their value system, it's quite pathetic the way they treat Tibetans and Uyghur Muslims. And there's no freedom of speech. There's no freedom of religion. They're not enlightened like the West.
Okay, so firstly, it's completely wrong to compare China with the West. Okay, China used to be a third world country. So if you want to understand China, you should compare China with the kind of countries China was standing shoulder to shoulder in 1990s. So for example, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Pakistan, those are the kind of countries you should be comparing China with. The US is a far more developed country than China is. China has shown that it has continued to progress culturally and economically. Now, what they have done to Tibet and in Xinjiang province, to the Muslims there, it's nothing too unusual compared to what, let's say, Indians have done to people in northeastern provinces, Nagaland, Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh, or Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, remember, India was shameless in how it occupied Goa and Hyderabad after independence. Most people don't even know about it. These were separate countries. India just decided it had to take these countries over. So there's nothing especially bad about what China has done in Tibet and Xinjiang compared to what other third world countries have done to their own minorities. Now, Tibet is a much richer place because of Chinese, and Xinjiang province has its problems, but there is no conclusive evidence that there are gulags, that there are forced imprisonment of people of Muslim following in Xinjiang on a systematic basis. So I haven't seen conclusive proofs of that. Now, some of the governments would claim that, but how much should I trust those governments? American government and British government said that there were weapons of mass destruction under Saddam Hussein in Iraq. That came out to be completely false. So how much do I really know about what's happening in Xinjiang? So those are not enough of reasons. They are factors, and China is not perfect in any way whatsoever. And I can identify a lot more worse things about China than these internationally, the international headlines you see about China. Now, as far as freedom of speech is concerned, let me tell you, Pratham, I feel much more free speaking up in China than I do in India. And freedom of speech is going away very rapidly around the world. Look at the Western countries. White people particularly cannot say a lot of things that are important to them. You were talking about cancel culture. So you get canceled very quickly in the Western society today. So what is the freedom of speech? What is your freedom of speech? In India, yes, theoretically you have freedom of speech, but go out and complain about the local goon and see what happens. Go out and complain about the local bureaucrat who is asking for a bribe. I guarantee you, the court system, the police will not be there to help you because you simply don't have freedom of speech. So you can't speak up because of so many reasons. So Chinese can mostly speak up about most things, except that they cannot challenge the existence of their central government and the CCP. So yes, I mean, no one is perfect. It's just on an overall basis. I like China 100 times more than I like India.
Okay. How do you think Indians should behave when they emigrate to the West?
I think it takes a while. It takes many years to start understanding the Western civilization. But you should move to the Western society only and only if you like the Western civilization, if you like Western philosophy. If you are moving to the West only to make more money or to make your life materialistically better, then in my view, you are a negative value to the Western society. And most people who move to the West do not have moral consciousness, and they are not interested in Western philosophy. They are there just to make money. They are materialistic people. But if you are interested in the Western culture, Western society, then your it will still take you time to understand how the Western society works. But that's the kind of people who should move. And if they move, they should be paying a lot of attention to the moral consciousness that the Western society has.
And finally, I think I'll end this podcast on with a very vague question. What is the purpose of life?
Oh, what is the purpose of life? I haven't figured that out, Pratham, really. I want to, the way I look at life is that my next step should be better than my last step. And because I don't have a clarity on what the goal is, all I care about is to make sure that my next step is better than the last step. And that means that I should live my life with honesty, integrity, and honor, and self-responsibility. And that's where libertarianism comes into picture. My life is not centered on materialism. I'm not chasing money. Now, money comes to me, that's a different thing altogether, but I'm not chasing money. I'm just trying to improve myself as a human being. And hopefully, as time goes by, as I continue to live a more honorable, more self-responsible life, and as I continue to improve myself, hopefully the cloud in front of my goals, which is the purpose of life, might become clearer.
Well, thank you so much, Jayant, for being on my podcast. This was a very educational conversation.
Pratham, thanks very much for the opportunity.